monopoly, Thames Water, has been in the news with its auditors warning that its parent company, Kemble Water Holdings, could run out of money by next April if shareholders don't pump in more cash. Thames Water has also been in the news for increasing pollution of its rivers by 18% and for wanting to put up your bills by 40%. It's time to bring Thames Water into public ownership. Welcome everyone. My name's Kat and this is We Own It Live. We Own It campaigns for public ownership. We're here because we believe in public services for people, not profit, and we want to do something about it. And I'm really delighted today to be talking to Ash Smith, who is the founder of Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. Hi Ash, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's really great to have you here. And before we get into Thames Water, everything that's been happening in the news, and what we think should happen next, you know, why it should be in public ownership, how it should be in public ownership, it would be great just to hear from you about why you set up Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, what you do, what your background is, so people can understand a bit about that.
Sure. I live in Oxfordshire, near to Witney, which is on the edge of the Cotswolds. I moved here in around 2013 to do up a house, and we were going to live near the River Windrush, which I'd heard was a fantastically beautiful limestone river. And when I arrived, I thought, well, that looks a little bit kind of sick. But it took me a little while to get used to it. I'd spent my life around rivers. I used to be an angler for a long time. And then I started scuba diving, and I got very much into the way fish behave and the natural environment. And I've seen. I lived through the ages. I lived through the as a young man through the 70s and 80s, when a lot of our rivers were absolutely stunningly beautiful, and by and large, that scene has disappeared, and it's certainly disappeared on the Windrush. So I started to get more interested in it. As I finished off a building project here, I realized that the river was very sick. Started to ask questions of the Environment Agency, and I learned things then that quite shocked me. And I realized that the attitude of the agency was really just to manage the decline of our rivers. They'd given up. And I thought, well, if we don't do something, we can either sit back and moan about it and just be depressed about it, or we can get off our butts and do something. So luckily with my close neighbor, who's a mathematician, a most incredible analyst of data, and other neighbors and local people, put together Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. And we've really kind of got into finding out the dreadful truth about what's been going on.
Yeah, and it's an amazing resource. If people want to check it out, maybe we can put the Windrush website in the chat. That's really good that you've got a mathematician as a kind of fellow campaigner. And there's some fantastic quotes on the site. I picked out, we want to pass the river on to the next generation as an asset, not a liability. And you've said, not only is it often unsafe to let your children paddle in the Windrush, sometimes it isn't even safe to let dogs in, which is really powerful stuff. I wanted to ask you a slightly challenging devil's advocate question that we might get if this video goes to people who disagree. You said about the rivers being really beautiful in the 70s and 80s, but people often say, well, we were the dirty man of Europe. The sewage was bad. And obviously we know that actually after privatization, actually investment went down. So things got worse. But what would be your kind of riposte to that?
Well, it's true that many rivers were very badly damaged by industry, by heavy industry. Now, ironically, a lot of that was solved by Margaret Thatcher, pretty much taking that industry out of the equation. So rivers that were once dumping grounds for heavy polluters became clear of that. The water industry was hovering always in the background, and certainly in the 10 years prior to privatization, the industry was starved of the ability to invest, to make it more vulnerable and more suitable for the public to accept it being privatized. So yes, there was an improvement. There's certainly an improvement in some of those industrial rivers, like the Trent, for example, which used to be piled high with foam, and is now quite a renowned home for some very healthy fish. Although, as with all of these rivers, they're now reaching crisis point courtesy of the water industry, which is using our rivers as a simple way to get rid of its pollution problems, to solve its underinvestment by dumping the sewage that it can't treat into our rivers, and also more insidiously behind the background, not really treating them in the way that they should be, not really treating the effluent as it should be. As people may have seen in Panorama, there are many ways to cheat the permit requirements, which are very, very vague and very easy to avoid.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. And it seems like we had, a bit of an improvement with EU law despite privatization. And then it's been this downhill trend where the abuse really of our rivers and seas has just become completely flagrant. And I was just watching Panorama, absolutely stunned by the extent to which, like, the shamelessness of it. And there was even a quote, because this Panorama, for people who missed it, it was on BBC One, 8 p.m. on Monday this week. It was looking in particular at United Utilities and the sort of relationship with the Environment Agency, and how the Environment Agency wasn't holding them to account, but also United Utilities were really just lying. And it made it really clear how their driving force is making a profit. And they literally said, the environment doesn't factor in, basically, like that's not what we're here to do, look after the environment. So just unbelievable.
That's it. I mean, that's the reality of privatized water. Its focus is on extracting as much money from the bill payer, the captive bill payer, as it can possibly get away with. And if the collateral damage to that is the environment or the customer or anything else, these are monopoly companies. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. There's nothing you can do about it apart from force this thing to be a voting issue. And it is going that way. Doesn't matter which party does it. We're a pan-political group. We just want to persuade politicians that the right way forward is to protect our most beautiful and precious asset, water, and the most vital resource, because a lot of this stuff actually it's even deeper than the pollution that you see on the surface, the dead fish, the grey rivers that were once clear with beautiful flowing weed and lots of life. It's beyond that. It's a lot of pollution that's getting into groundwater. It's getting into the water supply. People don't even know what a lot of the chemicals that we put into this stuff are doing to us. There's a lot of concern over the forever chemicals that we're hearing about. And the water industry is focused just on getting the maximum money out. Now, that is not a criticism of the people that work for the water industry. And we have many, many good, honest friends and contacts in the water industry that are doing the very best they can with the money that they can get from those companies. But they are starved of resources in the same way that prior to privatization. And when they do something, it's phenomenally and ridiculously expensive, to the point where we wonder where that money is really going. And we're seeing those people losing their jobs and having their hours cut. And they are the most vital part of it. They're the people that are just holding the threads of some of these really, really shabby sewage works together and turning out a reasonable product at the end of it. So no criticism there. Same goes for some of the good people in the Environment Agency. But the agency is a sick organization that has lost its way. It's become captured by the water industry, and it's now serving the water industry instead of the environment and the customer and the public.
Yeah, it's really devastating, and its funding has been reduced so drastically. And I guess there's been a massive culture shift with that. Before we get into more of why Thames Water should be in public ownership and how we do that, let's just show your video now, Ash, of what's going on in the River Windrush, to give people a sense of that.
So it's actually a stream in the Windrush catchment. It's called the Shillbrook. This has already run through a lot of agricultural land, and you can see how beautiful it is. That's a limestone stream. Those are little native brown trout. This is just descending into the water below the first sewage works outfall that it hits. And this is treated. This is the effect of treated sewage. So you've got a lot of phosphates and nitrates. You've got all sorts of other chemicals that are not removed during treatment. And this is also a place where a lot of untreated sewage has passed through. And then we're moving downstream to the second sewage works that it passes, and look at the state of the river now. Now that should be the same as the images we saw in those first clips, that clear gravel covered in fine sediment, algae, brown algae, an absolute shocking image that is quite common. People will recognize that, and they will recognize the change that's happened into rivers that they knew perhaps as young people as beautiful and full of life. We've got great images from the Windrush itself, crystal clear, full of weed, full of fish in the late 90s. And we've taken the images in the same place now, and it's just a grey slab of water. Now, there are still fish hanging on in there, and sometimes you will see signs of otters, and you'll see kingfish, and you think, well, how can that be a problem? Well, it is a problem. Those animals live on. They adapt, and they may live shorter lives, and they may live more difficult lives. For example, the otters on the Windrush, if you look at their sprain, which is otter poo, which strangely smells of jasmine tea. Check that out if you don't believe that strange fact. They're made up entirely of shell from invasive crayfish, actually. So the crayfish that were once a plague have become the staple diet of the otter.
Wow, that makes me very sad and quite angry. And you just think all of this dialogue around taking back control, and now, we know that if the Labour Party is elected, they want to have a legislation passed around taking back control. I would like to see them take back control of our rivers and seas and get the sewage out. Like, it can't be rocket science, and I'm sure you can tell us, that it can be done. And obviously, we just can't do that when we've got companies like Thames Water in charge that are this is so not what interests them. And, like you say, even if good people are working there, they can't, their incentives are all wrong. So let's talk about why Thames Water should be in public ownership. Then we'll talk briefly about how we could bring Thames Water into public ownership. And if people have questions around that, do put them in the chat, and we will get to them in the Q&A bit of the call. Because after the stories that we've had this week, and in fact, for some months now, since June, it's really obvious that Thames Water is absolutely on the brink. 14.7 billion in debt. It turns out that the rescue equity that its shareholders supposedly put in to help out actually turned out to be a loan at 8% interest. We've seen the stories this week that pollution has increased with Thames Water by 18%. They're kind of cheekily asking to increase our bills by 40%. They're asking Ofwat if they can increase our bills by 40%. They're telling us, our turnaround plan is going to take time. The people telling us that, by the way, the interim CEO, Catherine Ross, previously worked at Ofwat. So, it's a complete revolving door anyway. And we're supposed to just say, oh, okay, right, you're a collapsing company. But sure, we'll just give you all the time in the world that you need and all the bills that you need to sort this out, even though you've got absolutely nothing to recommend you. It's just unbelievable. And there was a statement that it made to Ofwat, which, sounded pretty threatening as well, saying, we need to be allowed to have reasonable returns on our capital and to offer investors the opportunities to earn the returns required to finance it. It's like, well, yes, of course, because that's how it's set up, and it actually, this stuff does feel personal because we don't like to see, dead fish and dying rivers. But actually, it's on one level, it's not personal. That is what the investors expect. And you would expect that. But why on earth have we allowed this monopoly to be run in the interests of these investors?
It is quite remarkable that they want reasonable returns to be made, because they've always taken very unreasonable returns. Ofwat claims to have regulated those returns to keep them reasonable, but if you look back at the accounts, that's not the case at all. They've been charging phenomenal amounts of interest within intercompany loans. They've only got one regulated company in the Thames Water structure. If you look at it, it's surrounded by all sorts of unregulated entities that are used for shifting money around. They ditched the one that they used to have in the Cayman Islands because it was so blatantly dodgy. But that's the nature of the business that you're looking at. And claims about investment. We had this discussion with the predecessor of Catherine Ross, Sarah Bentley, last year, when they were promising to put, investors were going to put 2 billion in to the environment. And we met her and we spoke about that, because we understood, and she confirmed it, that those investors have never, ever, ever put their own equity into the company. All they've done is to buy a stake in it. You buy some shares, you own some shares in the company, and those shares go up or down normally. Well, in this case, you also get dividends. But dividends for what? The investment that's been put in, the 160 billion to 190 billion, depending on which politician is talking about it, that's allegedly coming from privatization. We understand from our correspondence with Ofwat and other investigations that have been done by people like David Hall from Greenwich University, have showed that that money is just bill payers' money. That's bill payers' money. So for every pound of that, if you look at the dividends that took out, we would charge 45 pence for them to spend that money and not take it away as dividends. So in every way, in every respect, it's a scam. There's no, if you can spell it out and put it into clear language for people, they will be shocked when it comes out. In the end, they will be absolutely shocked that we have been victim to such a simple and blatant scam. And the motivation for all of this is profit, which private equity funds are very good at getting out of people in all sorts of different ways. The latest investigation by Ofwat into Thames Water that was claiming that it wasn't paying dividends when it clearly was. It was just shifting them around as dividend payments. And that was done in spite of failing to deliver on the environmental requirements that were supposed to justify that. The only reason that money was brought back into the company was to allow that company to have a financial state that would allow those investors to take more money out of it. It had to have that degree of financial stability, otherwise it goes into a cash lockdown. It can't take money out. So there's a lot of deceit going on even now. Catherine Ross spoke the other day at a stakeholders meeting about its most important thing is to regain public trust. Well, this isn't the way to do it. Telling lies to the public is not the way to regain their trust. And it's very hard to see how anything could really move on. And people shouldn't be afraid about, okay, what about all the debt? Who's going to pay for that? Guess what? You're already paying for it. So what's the difference? You're just going to you're going to feel a whole lot better when you remove a parasite from the organization and allow it the freedom, allow the people that work for it to do their jobs and to do their jobs with the money that should be going to them, not to shareholders. Which are, the shareholders are in China, Abu Dhabi, Canada, elsewhere. Some even the university superannuation scheme in the UK, not showing any kind of moral fibre in any of this. Very, very disappointing.
Yeah, completely. And let's just get up. We've got a slide that shows the ownership of the water companies. So maybe let's just get that slide up to just show that. So if you're not in the Thames Water area, you can also see who owns your water company. If you're in England, if you're in Scotland, obviously a different story. Scottish Water is publicly owned. Welsh Water, sort of somewhere in between, unaccountable, not for profit. But yeah, it's not really us who owns our water. And let's now, to lead into the discussion about how we bring Thames into public ownership, let's look at that complex ownership structure that you referred to, Ash, which people can see. This is the parent company that's being referred to, and this just looks like it's been designed to confuse and bamboozle us all, which they've been doing pretty successfully since privatization in 1989. So we've had some great questions coming in on the chat, and I think let's talk about how we bring Thames Water into public ownership. I've got a few ideas. I'm sure you've got a few ideas as well, Ash, and we can touch on these questions as well, which are really crucial ones. Do you want to kick us off, and then I'll come in?
From my point of view, I think a lot is said about allowing market forces to take place, to do their thing, except when they're doing something inconvenient like this, which is pushing these companies to the edge of bankruptcy. Now they were privatized generously with bonuses. They were all the debt was taken away from them, and research that's been done shows that the money that they borrowed was never necessary. There was always enough money from the bill payer to do what they did. They didn't need to take that money out. They took that money out to pay that to shareholders, and at the same time they've made a lot of money through not investing and covering that underinvestment by committing criminal offences. Now, those criminal offences may not have been prosecuted, but they are nonetheless criminal. And they've been prevented from prosecution by government policy, which prevents the Environment Agency from prosecuting anything but when there is a whole bunch of dead fish. Now, a lot of pollution that's been so destructive is chronic and has destroyed our rivers bit by bit through slowly killing off those fish populations, or in small enough numbers to creep under the prosecution threshold. And of course, when you've killed all the fish, as they did in the whole of the River Ray, came out of Swindon Sewage Works last year, killed the whole river. I was there wading amongst a tragic scene of dead fish, thousands and thousands of dead fish. And then I was at another big sewage burst a few months later, and there were no dead fish. And you know why that was? Because there were no fish to kill anymore. So that could not be a serious pollution incident of that category 1 nature, because there was nothing left to kill. So the industry has made a lot of money that way. And you've got to question also that it's made its money breaching the license requirement of Ofwat, which say that you cannot take dividends out if they're going to stop the company functioning properly, which surely must mean legally. So we think there are firm prosecution now of the offences that the industry has become reliant upon, and harsh action by Ofwat, which is waking up. Ofwat is an organisation that is open to conversation. We've had some very sensible conversations from the boss of Ofwat and their team there. They are listening. Unlike the Environment Agency, they are listening, and they have got the ability to make these companies fail. And if they do, they should make them fail in a controlled way, so that they're then taken into public ownership in the way perhaps that has been so successful with some of the railways.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it should be controlled, and it should be, but it's really important, as you say, like it has to be done in the public interest. So, we saw when Bulb, the energy retail company, collapsed, the government picked up the pieces, and that cost us 6.5 billion. That cost the public 6.5 billion. And then they simply handed it back to another private company, Octopus. And my fear is that happens if Thames Water collapses. So I think we have to be saying really clearly, have scenarios in our minds. One scenario is Thames Water can't get this money out of its shareholders, and it's on the brink of collapse. And then the government should let it go insolvent, because we know that in that case we won't have to pay for their mess, essentially. Which is what happened with, for example, Northern Rock. If market value is zero, then yes, let's pay market value, which is zero, because they've made such a mess of things. If Thames Water doesn't collapse, but it sort of staggers on in this way, polluting our rivers, putting up our bills, etc., I think, there's a few tools that government could use. There are those special administration powers, as you say, Ofwat could be using those powers either on financial grounds or on the grounds that it's not fulfilling its duties, in terms of looking after the environment. Those special administration powers exist, and they could be used by the regulators to say, you're not fulfilling your duties, so, we're going to withdraw your license. And also, I think people don't often realise that the water companies, they're on a 25-year notice period for their license. So they've kind of got built into the system that we have to give them 25 years notice before we withdraw a contract. Now, I know 25 years is a very long way away, and you might say, well, that's an irrelevant point, but I think it's actually really important to say, let's start the clock ticking now. Like like we should be giving them notice now. Like, time's up, guys. This hasn't worked. 25 years. Obviously, it's not going to take that long. But actually, let's call their bluff. Let's call a halt to this nonsense. And if you do actually say, we're giving you notice now, the contract's going to end. Again, the market value could fall. And if I was managing one of these pension funds like the university pension fund, I would be saying, let's withdraw from this. This is not a good long-term prospect, because if the company does collapse, or it's taken into special administration, or we start that ticking clock saying this hasn't worked for the public at large, that's not going to benefit those people who have pensions. So it's not the place to be. There's lots of ways of growing pensions without extracting value from vital public services by killing our environment and killing fish. So those are a few ideas there as well. Did you want to come back in, Ash?
Well, the water companies at the beginning were given the derogation of the law. They were allowed to break the law to start with, to give them time to get their act together. Now they've had 33 years, and they've claimed to have been legal. And if you look back a few years, even look back to what the Environment Agency was saying, even in 2018, they're functioning really, really well. This was all fake news that the Environment Agency was kind of either too incompetent to have worked out. It had to be revealed by the analyst I mentioned, Professor Peter Hammond. He showed how much illegal pollution was going on. So the water industry has become reliant on illegally polluting. Now, if we say now that's got to end, you've got 6 months or a year to sort that out. That will put those companies into perspective. The worst ones will be able to weather that and sort themselves out. The others won't. And you've got to say that some of the chief executives are saying, we don't get up in the morning and make a decision to break the law and pollute illegally. Well, I disagree. You must do. You absolutely certainly do that, because you are breaking the law. Thames Water has admitted to be operating illegally at 6 sewage works in our area. Every time a pollution happens in dry conditions, that's an illegal event. And when they're not treating enough sewage before dumping it, that's an illegal event. These are routine illegal actions that if perhaps the prosecution had moved on, not from the company, which sucks it up and gets the bill payer to really pay those fines, but to the directors involved, and it affected them and their bonuses, and if necessary their personal prosecution, we would not be seeing this happen. Yeah,
that's really well said. It's part of their business model. It's routine. I think though that there's a lot of talk about bonuses right now, and I think it's a bit marginal, because actually it's not going to fix it. I don't know what you think of that.
It's not going to fix it, because you know how clever the water industry is at moving money around. If you think they can't pay the bonuses in another way, then I think we're being very, very naive. But yeah, the bonuses are paid to to serve the shareholders, not necessarily the environment or the public. And that's for sure. They will find another way to pay that, in the same way that they found new ways to pay dividends. It's not the answer. This is far more radical. We have to take away pollution for profit. If you make profit from polluting, you're going to do it. There's no morality in this business. Let's not kid ourselves. They don't even care about the law. My morality. They don't care about the criminal law. So get the profit motive out of this thing. Get it into public ownership. Let's start to move on, like other countries like Denmark, Germany, Sweden. We've all seen. We've looked at what they're doing in those countries, and they're innovating, and they're you go to Zurich Sewage Works and you see what they're going to churn out there to protect their water. It makes us look very, very primitive and dirty.
Yeah, and Paris is cleaning up the Seine and kind of leading the way on public ownership best practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got some great questions. Let's get to the Q&A. So Jennifer says, will it cost a huge amount to clean up the rivers? If so, it's going to be a hard job to get the Labour Party to take it on. And she also says, can the offending private water companies be made to clean up the damage on their watch? What are your thoughts on that, Ash?
Excuse me. So the water industry has always claimed things are much more expensive than they really are, because they used to do that because everything had to pass a cost-benefit test. And guess what? Nothing ever did. The Storm Overflow Assessment Framework came in 2018. That was supposed to deal with storm overflows that were dumping untreated sewage too much. That we revealed, not the Environment Agency, WASP revealed that in 4 years that hadn't achieved one single improvement because they always were too expensive. The water industry, when that big kerfuffle happened, when the toxic votes were being passed in Parliament over, the continuing to allow the water companies to dump untreated sewage, the water industry commissioned a report on how much it would cost, and they dreamed up basically a figure of something like £650 billion. But this is nonsense. That was to basically dig up every sewer in every city in the most expensive way, and to do it that way. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. I think the general estimate is that it would probably cost roughly, you could have probably very, very good job for the amount of money that the investors have sucked out for something like 65 billion rather than 650, bearing in mind they took out 72 billion. So we're talking about improvements that could be made very, very quickly. And we've also looked hard at what the water companies claim to do for certain amounts of money, and you'll be amazed at how little they are getting for millions of pounds. Now, there's my gut feeling, my experience of having dealt with this is that there are some very, very large amounts of smoke and mirrors going on here, and it doesn't really cost £3 million to build a couple of concrete tanks and stick some pipes in. The money gets shared out in some kind of efficiency savings, and it goes somewhere else, because you really will be amazed when you see the bill that's given to them for, and people in the industry feel this way as well. They wonder why stuff costs so phenomenally high figures. People will say concrete's expensive. Well, it's not platinum, it's concrete. And you would think surely these tanks must be made out of precious metals to be costing that sort of money.
Yeah. And they're sort of incentivized, aren't they, to do more of the hard engineering stuff rather than some of the nature-based solutions as well, I think.
Well, yeah, and I'm really cautious about nature-based solutions as well, because a lot of them, they don't necessarily work that well. They're an easy thing to do, and water companies are now liking the look of those because they can bring those in and they're very cheap, but then they can start to charge huge amounts of money for them as well. And they also bring in NGOs around that and other people in that kind of green economy, and they do the double kind of greenwash and under investment whammy at the same time. So I'm very cautious about that. Treating sewage is not easy. You go into a supermarket, walk down the laundry aisle and the cleaning aisles and look at all those products and realize they're all going in the river. They're all going in the river or see it at some point. Turn them around, look at the labels on the back, and you'll see things like harmful to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. That's on the back of fairy liquid, right? So this is common stuff that the government's, again, this laissez-faire attitude, the deregulation that it applies to the chemical industry, lets anything go, really. You have to prove that it's harmful before they will do anything about it. And of course, the chemical industry is very good at not proving stuff is harmful for a long time. There's a long history of disappointing results going back over history that generally have an ill effect on all of us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard that Paris is doing some good work with getting farmers to switch to more organic methods, less fertilizer upstream, that kind of thing. But maybe there's also some, I guess there's a whole variety, nature-based solutions. We probably need to break down to what that actually means, and whether it's greenwash or whether it's, positive moves.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt that farming is often said to be the major polluter, but actually farming is implicated in more pollution incidents according to the Environment Agency, but that's a very different thing from saying it's the most serious polluter, because a lot of that just means that the river runs always through farmland. So there's other research that indicates that the water industry is far more a serious problem. And we're lucky in the Windrush Valley in that our farmers are often organic, or they're certainly responsible. And that's why we chose sewage as our target. Not the same everywhere. And certainly industrial farming is a shocker in every aspect. When any shareholder-based thing gets hold of any industry, everything else falls by the wayside, animal welfare, pollution, whatever it may be. We know that it's all about the bottom line.
Yeah. So just quickly, a couple more questions. So David asks about how many companies there are owning the water companies in the UK, and is there a mechanism for renationalising the water industry and for running such an organisation? So David, we say you should have the regional publicly owned companies working on behalf of citizens, workers, communities, environmental groups, held accountable to those. So it should be publicly owned and publicly accountable. And we talked a little bit earlier, you might have missed it, about different mechanisms, but basically we need to be holding these water companies to account in such a way that, they start to clean up their own mess, which is the question that Jennifer mentioned. And actually when we do that, then their market value is not going to be so high, because their market value is based on them being monopolies where they have their customers over a barrel. We cannot choose who to use for our water and sewage services. There is no market. And so the market value is basically expectation of future inflated profits. And obviously what we need to do is show that, bringing these water companies into public ownership is going to be much better. And actually, even if you pay market value, in the long term, we're going to get back those dividends that have been going to shareholders. We're going to have a lower cost of borrowing in public ownership. However, we should be really, having a two-stage process where we're pushing these companies to actually clean up their own mess before taking them into public ownership so they can work in the public interest and for the environment. And a question, you might have more to say on that, Ash, and maybe you could touch on another question, which is from John Bosco. As we head toward the next general election, do you expect this scandal to become even more prominent in the media and mount even more pressure on the politicians to do something at last?
Well, we do quite a lot of investigation in WASP, and we're in touch with groups all around the country. We know that scandal that came out in Panorama is just the start. They had to edit a lot of good material out of that. It's a sad thing, but there's way more to come. And I think it's all about public awareness. It's people power, the power of the voter, that's going to make this turn around. People that have not got to accept compromising. It's not like, can we have a healthy economy and a clean environment? Of course you can. But can people absolutely milk it for money all the time and prevent us having both? That's the bit that we can take out. And that's the bit that we have to take out. And a lot of it's about, from our point of view, is about public awareness. We knew at the beginning that people would be very concerned about this, but awareness was low. We had to get this up into the level of understanding of bees and plastic and the big environmental issues, and it's heading that way. And because it affects every one of us, and it's so absolutely unavoidable. It's so avoidable. It affects not only our environment, but also it's a scam. It's a rip-off of, if people don't care about the environment, they surely do care about paying for stuff that they're not being given.
Yeah. And I think the reason that this is becoming so politically salient, because, this has been going on a long time, but it's become more and more of a scandal as awareness has been increased. And that's really down to groups like yours, groups like Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, Surfers Against Sewage, clean river groups around the country, like pointing this out, highlighting it relentlessly and saying to Ofwat and the Environment Agency and the water companies and the government, we will not stand for this anymore. SOS Whitstable is another one, but groups all over the country saying we're not going to have this sewage in our rivers and seas anymore. You have to stop this, and the way to stop it is to have public ownership. So do check out Windrush Against Sewage Pollution's website. Action of the week, maybe two actions. Check out Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, and I think Ash said write to your MP. I mean, politicians need to know that this is an issue high on people's agendas. Also, sign our petition, which is to say, bring Thames Water into public ownership, but do not bail it out. Make them pay for the mess. Make public ownership permanent, not temporary. We don't want this to be a temporary measure because privatisation has failed. and make them clean up the rivers instead of carrying on the way they have been. So we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Ash, for joining us today. It's been really wonderful to talk to you about your amazing work.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's joined us on the call and for your comments and questions. And we will see you soon for another We Own It Live. Thanks, everyone.